Okay, good morning, everyone. Senator Dave Severson from Cherry Valley, up on the northern part of the district. In just 2 weeks, Governor Pritzker will be delivering his budget address. But Illinois families already know the reality that Illinois is facing, which is a $3 to $3.5 billion budget hole fueled by years of bad spending decisions by the governor and the ruling party. The biggest part of this shortfall is caused by the decision to prioritize the spending of over $1 billion for non-citizens, while working families continue to struggle. This problem was compounded by the governor's promise to make Illinois the most welcoming state in the nation for non-citizens from anywhere around the world. Now the bill for that promise is coming due, and Illinois taxpayers are asked to pick up the bill. As you know, just a few months ago, the governor signed a budget that raised taxes by nearly $1 billion to cover the cost of those non-citizen health care costs. So here's our concern today. Much of this spending has fallen under the repeated emergency declarations by the governor. Just this last Friday, the governor issued his 30th declaration, proclaiming that this would give him more resources and would give him sweeping executive authority to move taxpayer dollars around and bypass the normal budget process. And doing it without legislative input or public oversight. Lawmakers, more importantly taxpayers, are being kept in the dark about how much is really being spent on non-citizen programs. And as a result, which programs for Illinois citizens are being reduced or delayed as a result. There's been a clear urgency the last few years to ensure that non-citizen programs get fully funded. But where is that same concern for issues that are impacting Illinois' working families? As we look at the upcoming budget, as Republicans, we believe, number one, it must not include any more taxes or fee increases. It must not shift any more costs to local property taxpayers, and it must include more transparency and accountability for every tax dollar being spent. It's clear if you look at the numbers, Illinois does not have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem. And we hope that this budget will reflect the priorities of Illinois. Joining me today are a couple of our senators that also want to make some comments. Lee Ariano, do you want to jump in and go next?
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Leandro Lee. I go by Ariano Jr. I'm from Dixon. I was a mayor there for 8 years, and I'm proud to represent the 37th Legislative District. Before becoming a state senator, as I mentioned, I served as mayor of a town that learned firsthand what a lack of transparency can do. And it might be a bit of an extreme example, but it's one I lived, and it's one that shows the importance of transparency in protecting taxpayer dollars. In 2012, City Comptroller Rita Crundwell embezzled $54 million over a period of 20 years, $54 million from the city of Dixon. Again, it's an extreme example, but again, it goes to show what happens when you lose oversight. Governor Pritzker has done an endless series of disaster proclamations, and it's created an environment where billions of taxpayer dollars can be shifted around without meaningful oversight. And no one knows for sure where it is going. Instead of negotiating the spending through a legislative process as intended, Governor Pritzker has repeatedly bypassed lawmakers and those legislative processes and oversight. Nearly a year ago, my colleagues asked some basic questions that still have not been answered. What specific budget line items are used to fund services for non-citizens? How much taxpayer money has been spent on housing, on health care, and education for this population? Are there additional agencies involved that haven't been disclosed to the public. Leader Curran introduced legislation to demand transparency, but the governor's administration continues to dodge accountability, which I believe is a basic foundation of fiscal responsibility and policy oversight. It's clear that a wide range of state agencies have been pulled into this spending. State agencies like Public Health, Human Services, IEMA, and the State Board of Education have been pulled into unchecked spending with little oversight or public scrutiny. We need answers to these basic questions about how taxpayer dollars are being used, especially at a time when we are looking at an over $3 billion shortfall. I will now turn it over to my colleague, Senator Tracy.
Thank you, Senator. I'm Jill Tracy, and I represent the 50th Senate District, representing West Central Illinois. With the budget address just 2 weeks away, the people of Illinois deserve to know how much of their money is being spent on Governor Pritzker's non-citizen welfare programs, especially as we face this $3.2 billion budget deficit in several weeks. Over the past several years, Pritzker has issued numerous emergency proclamations using executive power and transfer authority to move funds without transparency or accountability. And it leaves both lawmakers and, most importantly, the taxpayers in the dark about where their money is going. The governor must know that if we work together, we work better, even in a bipartisan fashion. Leaving lawmakers out of these decisions is ignoring the voice of Illinoisans. It's a slap in the face to the hundreds of thousands of people we represent. Today, we are refiling to provide much-needed transparency on this spending, and it's Senate Bill 1699. It requires an annual report to the General Assembly detailing all state spending on non-citizen populations. This report would also be made public and available to taxpayers so they can see exactly how their money is being spent. The report will include critical information such as total spending on non-citizens in the previous fiscal year, specific appropriations and line item transfers, the number of individuals and families receiving services such as housing and shelter and food, and also including information of the funding sources and contracts awarded to organizations for these services. And there's much more than just housing and shelter and other items, the health screenings and health care and the like. So these are all of the things that would be included on this report. The legislation would also require the governor to provide a detailed breakout of proposed spending on non-citizen populations in future state budgets, ensuring that taxpayers get full transparency before more funds are allocated. With Illinois facing this $3.2 billion budget deficit, it's more important than ever to understand how much is being spent on migrant services and which essential programs or agencies have their funds redirected to cover these costs. While the governor has shown urgency in ensuring non-citizens receive services that are fully funded, that same urgency seems to be missing, totally missing, when it comes to addressing the needs of Illinois families facing rising crime, inflation, and job instability. Senate Bill 1699 is necessary to restore public trust and give lawmakers and taxpayers the information they need to make more informed budget decisions. And with that, that concludes our remarks, and we'll open it up to questions.
Senator Jill Tracy, you mentioned there was non-citizen welfare programs that are being
Yes.
funded by the state.
Yes.
Could you name a few of them?
Well, there's welcome centers throughout the state, regionally, and these offer quite a few services. We have funded healthcare, and we've actually become a magnet for people throughout this country that have come here illegally to come here for the health services we offer. And that probably is the biggest generator of the costs. We've offered shelter. I mean, you can just look at the city of Chicago, how much money is being spent on non-citizens there and throughout the state. So good, it's a very good question, but there is definitely a large number of services and sources being used for these programs.
Just to follow up on that as well, wouldn't you also consider, back in 2022, 2023, a lot of migrants were being shipped from, Texas on buses. Wouldn't that also put a strain on the Illinois budget?
Yes, that's exactly what we're referring to. And we invited them, not we personally, but the governor and Mayor Brandon Johnson opened the doors wide open and invited people. And like I say, our health care programs that were set up, even before that time, opened up a wide cost of non-citizen services. And you want to say something?
I was going to say, citizens only came to those states that were invited. And so Illinois invited them, and so they were sent here. And that's the concern. We don't know what that total cost is, and people should know what that is. And so that's why this legislation is very simple. It just tells us how much is actually being spent in totality on all the programs, and it makes sense.
There's a long line of federal court cases that say public schools are not allowed to discriminate. A child shows up in your classroom, you teach them whether they're a citizen or not. As a result, schools don't ask about citizenship. And in fact, I think in Illinois, they're not allowed to ask about a child's or their parents' citizenship. So how do you itemize the cost in cases like that where you don't know who the non-citizens are?
Yeah, no one's talking about discriminating, but clearly,
But how do you itemize the cost of it?
clearly school districts know who these individuals are. When they look at their school records, they can see where they came from. When the students are interviewed, they know where they came from because they have to be placed in classrooms. And so school districts know. We talk to school districts who are frustrated by the increased number of students, which most of these end up being in special education classes. So that means even more costs. And again, we're not talking about discriminating. We're just trying to figure out what's the total cost of education, of law enforcement, of healthcare, of housing, all totality. What's the cost? And then as a state, once we know that, we can determine what's going to be the budget priority. But I think taxpayers deserve to know that at a time when we can do that for any other segment of the population. This is clearly the fastest growing part of our budget and should be one that everyone's aware of.